You center it on not just the fact that sin is is the basis of the relationship, but based on the fact that a lie is enshrined at the center of the relationship. Well, John, we have one more question here we'd like to hit before the end of the podcast, and this is a toughie, and it comes from someone who is very much sympathetic to our points, but I think is anticipating, in many ways, going back to that first question about echo chambers, anticipating what someone outside of the quote-unquote Christian echo chamber is going to say in response to a commentary we did about adoption as a single, in response to a question we received by a woman who is single. She's not married, but she has a deep heart for orphans in Eastern Europe, and she wanted to adopt. So we answered that question both on this podcast and in a Breakpoint commentary. This person asks in response to that. Last week, you had a question from a single woman asking about adoption. She was concerned that kids need a mom and a dad. You encouraged her to adopt, given her mindset. However, I could make the same argument you did for her with same-sex couples. It seems like you left the door open for that. I recognize being a single woman is not a sin, and being a same-sex couple is. Is that the answer you'd give?
Yes.
If the woman... Okay.
Yes. That's the answer. I mean, you can read the second part of the question because
the second part of
it
the
gets
question,
more
yeah,
interesting. But yeah, that is a simple and definitive difference between the two. But go ahead.
This person continues. If the woman who wrote you, instead of being single, said she was a Christian with a woman spouse, and she understood that Christian children need a mother and a father, but she has a strong desire to be a mother, and she and her partner have a wonderful, loving relationship, and is it really better for a child to be in a home or a foster care system instead of being in a loving home with this woman and her female spouse? Thanks again. I'm grateful for all y'all do. Excellent work. So we get that little sweetener at the end there.
Yeah. After throwing that question.
All right. So how about it, John?
Well, that second point is a great one. Let me just be clear too what the question was. The question wasn't, from this single woman, am I okay? And then are same-sex couples okay to make the same decision? She was asking about her own situation, and her own situation has no moral issues whatsoever. There's nothing in her story, as we knew it, I mean, unless there's something we don't know, in which she shows any confusion whatsoever about the reality of male and female as part of the created order, how that actually plays into both marriage and parenting, and then eventually into society.
She even goes out of her way to acknowledge it and then analyze her own motives on that basis.
Right. So we didn't justify her decision, or we didn't agree with her decision, or I didn't, based on the fact that she wanted them. We actually made that distinction between her desire and her situation. In this other case, so in other words, there wasn't any sort of equivocation between the two situations. She was specifically asking about her own, given her own motivations and what she understood needed to be the case. Now, look, legally, that's a different point, whether we should make something illegal or how do we actually take something that now is legal and backpedal it, which is a very difficult thing to do in the case of, so-called LGBTQ rights in these areas and so on.
The question we're really asking is what is best for the child? What are the rights of the child call for, and how do we fulfill that person's needs?
Let me say this: there's for this single woman to say, "I know a father would be absent," is very different than a same-sex couple saying, "This other woman can play the role of a father,"
right?
Or this other man can play the role of a mother. Or that somehow, by adding us two men together, we'll end up with an equivalent of what a mother and a father can bring. They can't. And it's not a moral position. It's not having to do with having good intentions or bad intentions. It actually isn't the case. This was something that Maria Bear brought up when we had a conversation about Bethany Christian Services. That Bethany Christian Services now, in an attempt to help children, has actually said, in a sense, that to help a child here is something that overcomes the potential wrong things they will learn about male, female, in the future. So Bethany Services has, in a sense, become a teacher that now aligns with the new sexual orthodoxy, saying it's no big deal. And the fact of the matter is, as far as I can see, both theologically, sociologically, anthropologically, and biblically, to equivocate those two is a big deal. So we're talking about an apple and oranges situation. Now, to this questioner's point, look, you say, for example, that marriage is inherently connected to procreation, and then you hear, well, what about people who are past the age of procreation, and if they can get married, therefore 2 men and 2 women can get married, because we're talking about infertility is infertility. Infertility is not infertility, right? A functioning system that no longer functions is not the same, or a system that's intended to function a particular way but doesn't, is not the same as a completely different system or a completely different set of functions. And we're talking about apples and oranges, and we can draw that line. Now, that doesn't mean that legally, this argument is as compelling, because there's a whole lot of other forces at work. But if this woman had, in fact, come to us, and if we get another question in the coming weeks in which a woman says, look, I realize that children need a mother and a father. I'm in a loving, committed, monogamous relationship with someone of the same sex, and we want to help a child, then my answer will be different.
Yeah, I think that's right, John. You center it on not just the fact that sin is is the basis of the relationship, but based on the fact that a lie is enshrined at the center of the relationship, that a child is being taught something about male and female. There's a denial of the necessity for both sexes to be involved there. So instead of a mother who's helping to make the best of a situation that a child is in by bringing that child into what she understands is a less than ideal environment, we have an environment that is it literally orbits around a denial of that need for both sexes. And so there's a teaching function, there's an endorsing function going on here. It's much more than just the sort of on the ground facts of where a child sleeps, who feeds the child, that sort of thing. And when I think about it, I guess I would counter with a question like this. If someone came to me and sort of aggressively asked this, was like, well, what about same-sex couples? You just said that a single mother should be able to adopt. And I'd bring it back to this idea of creating brokenness versus healing existing brokenness. I think you're creating new brokenness by bringing a child into a same-sex home that fundamentally denies the necessity of a father. I mean, Katie Faust talks about this, where when you're the child of a same-sex couple, you enter this really, really delicate dance, because on the one hand, you've got a desperate wound in your life. You've been denied a father or a mother, depending on the situation, and yet you're not allowed to express that, at least not openly, because that is perceived as an attack on your loving parents. So they look at that and say, well, weren't we enough? No, you weren't enough. But being brought into an environment where a single mother has adopted you, who is openly acknowledging your need for a father as well, and then seeking to remedy that brokenness through bringing you into a larger community where there are positive male figures, where there are sort of spiritual fathers in a way that can speak into your life. That's a totally different situation, and I think that we're warranted in distinguishing sharply between the two on that basis.
Yeah.
Well, we mentioned Katie Faust just now in her book, Them Before Us, and you guys actually did a webinar recently with her talking through some of the major points of the book here. And this is our premium for this month at the Colson Center. So you give a donation of any amount this month in March, and we'll give you a copy of Katie Faust's book. You can find that at breakpoint.org/March 2021. And I want you to listen to a short snippet from that webinar, because Katie's resource is just fantastic, and she's an excellent advocate for the cause of children.
We just give you about 30 stories of kids who were raised by same-sex couples who talk about their desperate, almost obsessive longing for the missing maternal or paternal love that they were made for. Chapter 7, we talk about sperm and egg donation and the deep, very distinct struggles that these kids experience. Feelings of commodification, like, I am uncomfortable. It feels like I was bought and sold because I was literally chosen out of a catalog. The reality that they suffer from the genealogical bewilderment of wondering, why do I look this way? Where did I get these features? Fantasizing about their missing parent, even if they were created through sperm donation, but raised by a loving father, a lot of times these kids fall asleep at night fantasizing about that missing biological connection. You know, who is my mother? Does she know that I exist? Will I ever find her? Have I already walked past her on the street and not even known about it? I mean, these are really common questions that kids ask.
Well, folks, I want to thank you so much for listening to the Breakpoint podcast today. We'll be back next week answering more of your worldview questions. If you want to ask a question, you can drop us a message on social media or email us. The address is askthecolsoncenter@colsoncenter.org, and we'd love to engage with it here on the program. For John Stone Street and the Colson Center, I'm Shane Morris. We'll see you next time.